Hi guys, this is Karthik from CAAPID Simplified, and today we're going to discuss one of the most commonly asked questions in almost every US DDS residency interview ever. What is that question? It's what are your strengths and weaknesses? This is probably the only question that can repeat in an interview, even outside dentistry and all your life, and still people struggle. Why do people struggle? They don't have a problem with coming up with a strength or a weakness. In fact, strengths are way easier. They have a problem with coming up with the right strength or weakness. And when they mention the word right, what they mean is, if I mention this weakness, will an admissions committee look down upon me? Will an admissions committee reject me? Will an admissions committee assume that I'm not a good candidate and therefore not select me? So these are the kind of questions that they ask themselves and confuse themselves when they think about their weaknesses. On the side of strengths, their primary problem is I'm a hard worker, I persevere, I can adapt, I can move to a new country, and so on and so forth. But then the question that they're asking is, well, isn't this the same thing that everybody else would say? How can I differentiate myself? How can I stand out from the crowd and make an impression in a strength that's so common amongst everybody else? True. So let's think about how to answer these two questions. And even better, in case you have a question about a strength being differentiated or a weakness being slightly in a dilemma on whether you want to express that or not, go ahead and post that strength or weakness here in the comments, and we will reply back as to whether that's okay or not. If not, you still have our WhatsApp number on the description. You can ping us, and we're happy to send you a quick reply within 12 hours. That being said, first, strengths. Now, it's not very difficult to find somebody's strength because we have a plenty, and clearly international students who have braved the storms, who have come in spite of several circumstances into the country, who are married into families that they do not know, who are raising children as young mothers, who are coming after a lot of experience and are still willing to pursue education at this stage of age. You have several life events that you've crossed to actually get to the point of where you are, whether you are young, whether you're old, whether you're experienced, inexperienced, whether you've had gap years or not. And therefore, you can conclude that you have several strengths common to the applicant pool, like perseverance, like hard work, like grit, like staying consistent, like your ability to manage multiple tasks, like your ability to manage family and work on equal par, like your ability to respect everybody in the community, both professional and social community with dignity, and treat people with respect. So these are qualities that are common among the applicant pool. Now, how do you think of strength that can differentiate you? First, try to think of yourself. If you had not traveled to the US, if you had not applied to DDS, then what would you be doing? Maybe you would be in dentistry in your home country. Maybe you would be in a different profession. In that profession, what would still be a consistent strength that you would be showcasing? Even if you were in a completely different profession, would you still be adaptable? Even if you were completely in a different country, would you still be perseverant of a goal that does not have an end? Would you still want to pursue academics? Think about a strength that is consistent to who you are and not to the life events that have influenced you. Now, most of us, at least foreign trained dentists, have this coping tendency. You throw challenges and I'll cope up. You have the authoritarian leader and I will cope up. You constrain me against competition and I will cope up. You push me into a new nation and I will cope up. So the challenges that we are facing are things that we weren't planning for all our life, and therefore we tend to consistently cope up, and that's probably our biggest strength. But then if these challenges were not posed and we were still doing, let's say we were a writer, what would be one strength about your writing, about you as a writer, that would manifest in you even if you did not face these life events? Maybe it's something like, I would speak the truth no matter what. I would never ever give up on my value of something. I would always be a keen listener. irrespective of which country, what situation I am in. I will always pick up a new language in the place I go. I will always prioritize eating the foods that I like and yet maintaining fitness to the extent that I could breathe properly. I would never push myself down into depression in spite of how difficult things are, because that's been a very casual thing in my life. So think about these events, in these trends that would manifest itself even if you were not a foreign trained dentist applying to a US school and going through the rigorous process of DDS or residency. That's one. Second, what's more important than your strength is how you talk about it. So even if you said that hard work is your greatest strength, and that's what every other candidate in the applicant pool is going to say, still, the example you quote for hard work would make a difference. If you can quote hard work in the context of a community, it always has greater leverage. Let me explain with an example. I was in a situation where I was completely in a new place. And in this new place, everybody was having barbecues around, but then something suddenly caught fire. It was at that moment that I realized nobody was going forward to help that person. And I thought, why? The person itself looked like he was on drugs and was gay, and in that place they were not exactly open to embracing LGBTQ in the community. But then for me, in that moment, I didn't care who that person was or what state of mind or alcoholic abuse he was in. All I did was I jumped in, helped him clear the fire that had caught in that place, clear the food, and moved on. People were in a quasi state, thinking whether they wanted help or not. They were watching all the action happening, and they were just quiet. Eventually, I came back, and once I drove back to the parking lot, there people who met me said, "Hey, that's a good thing you did. We were all stuck in our thoughts thinking about judging the person rather than working on the action. And you were here judging the action rather than thinking about the person." That is a quality we should teach our children. So in that situation, my empathy for that person really stood out, and I think this is one of my biggest strengths. You get it? So even though I spoke about empathy, which is also a very, very, very common strength that everybody speaks about, the example I gave is something that touches a person's heart. It's very personal, it's very simple to understand, and it's small in size to assimilate. Some people go on to say, "I have served 300 hours of community service. I've served people in different parts of Pakistan and India, 300, they come from 15 different religions and they come from racial backgrounds. I have a lot of empathy to put myself in their shoes." Well, yes, except that's too big a story to assimilate in the 1 minute that you're sharing. Have you always noticed that in a movie, the protagonist always goes through one central trouble, consistent, instead of the protagonist going through multiple different adventures? If it's multiple different adventures like a television series and it's packed into 3 hours, you would probably get bored because you're not trying to understand what is the crux of this movie. Similarly, you should have a very simple crux to showcase what your strength is. Okay, we've crossed about 8 minutes speaking about strengths. Now let's move on to weakness. Weakness is probably the most difficult for people. They get nervous. In fact, I was joking with an interview candidate who came to us and said, "When you ask about weakness, I'm clearly not able to answer." And I said, "Hey, looks like that's your weakness, not able to answer a question about weakness." Well, jokes aside, how do we answer this question about weakness? First, and my biggest recommendation, which people might not take in the best sense, is speak the truth. If you are lazy, if you are a person who's a perfectionist, if you take away opportunities from others because you're scared that they might do a bad job, if you try to control the situation when it's going out of control, if you try to be the parent in any case, even with your peers and colleagues because you grew up with your grandparents, whatever be the truth about your weakness, mention that truth. It always strikes a chord with an interviewer when you mention the truth about what your weakness is. The kind of truths that you do not want to mention, that you want to replace with, are ones that conflict with value systems. Now, when I talk about value systems, I'm talking about honesty, integrity, being ethical, and so on. Not with respect to skills or qualities. So leadership is a quality, and you have different good and bad ways of leadership. Relationship management, that's a quality. That's, you can have good and bad things, right? There's no right justice you can do. There's no correct way to manage a relationship. There's no correct way to lead a team. There's no correct way to manage a situation. There's no correct way to cope up with a problem, right? So in those situations, you can talk about weaknesses. In these situations, I put myself down and overthink about the situation. In this case, I tend to instantaneously within me, I blame somebody else before I think about. I tend to, when I'm anxious, I speak out my heart rather than let the other person listen initially, so on and so forth, right? There are no good or bad ways in this. So if your weakness is something that is in this gray area, right? It could be done this way or that way, and neither can be justified as good or bad. That is the kind of weakness you want to showcase. Do not showcase a weakness that conflicts with value systems, right? Do not say I lie or something like that. Like that might really be a problem, because now they would fear that this person's value systems, which you are born and continue to grow with, cannot be amended over time. So always speak about things which are in the gray area. I tend to struggle to speak to people who dominate in a situation. I'm not really comfortable opening up to a person when the first time I meet them. Is this wrong? That's not wrong. It's in the gray area. It's neither right nor wrong. So you can talk about that as a weakness. In social gatherings, I take my own time to settle in. It's pretty difficult for me to quickly network, but I build strong relationships later. So these kind of weaknesses, which are in the gray area, neither good or bad, are the best to speak about in an interview. Okay, so that's the summary. Do not conflict value systems. Speak largely about the gray area weaknesses. What's more important than the weakness itself is speaking about your coping mechanism. Now, why is this coping mechanism important? That denotes two things to the interviewer. First, you acknowledge that you have a weakness. You're not saying you're superhuman. Some people do a pathetic answer by saying, hey, I do not have any weaknesses at all. There cannot be a human being without any weaknesses. In fact, if you do not have weaknesses, then you do not have opportunities for improving yourself. That's the bigger understanding. We have this attitude of fail fast in the US. So you need something to fail at. You need a weakness to consider and acknowledge in the first place. So embrace your weakness, suggest it's there, and don't say now it's not there. I used to be scared of public speaking. Now it's not completely there. Talk about a coping mechanism. A coping mechanism is something like diabetes and a pill. So you do have diabetes, but you have changed your lifestyle to accommodate that, and you overcome it. That is what a coping mechanism is. So let's say my coping mechanism is my inability to quickly socialize in a gathering. Then my coping mechanism, if that's my weakness, my coping mechanism would be that I first go search for the people at the social gathering who are my friendlies, who I know the best and who I could do a smart conversation with. And I let them give me warm introductions to the rest of the crowd. I take an active interest in knowing new people, but the way I approach them is through warm introductions. I think that sets up a good starting point, because there's a certain credibility and a certain likeliness that a third person gets when I get a warm introduction. And then the person who introduced will also feel proud about making the connection, because they're in that place as well, primarily for the reason of networking. You kind of got the gist here. So for strengths, speak about that very unique example where you explained it. The example should be succinct, should be small and digestible. For weakness, speak about your coping mechanism and make it very lively and simple. Do not go ahead and say stuff like, I have so much stress when exams come that I do mindfulness, yoga, and spiritual. Maybe that's the truth, but do not overdo it. Make it pretty simple. Some people, the best answers are something like, when I get super stressed, I go and fight with my husband. And I literally heard this. So if that's your coping mechanism, that's okay. I mean, because that's something you can rely upon on a consistent basis for a very, very long time. So at the end of this, in my last 5 seconds, I want to tell you one thing. Whatever you do, do not conflict value systems, and always speak the truth. Thank you.